We all love to tell and listen to spooky stories around the campfire. Well, most of us, that is. Several years ago, a story started floating around the internet called the Russian sleep experiment. It involved the Russian government developing a gas during World War II that was able to keep people up for 15 days straight with some very, very bad side effects. The story was creepy, to say the least. What would happen if you were part of a real Russian sleep experiment? Okay, so it's 1947 in Russia, and a crazy scientist has been experimenting with gas. She's developed a strong stimulant that she hopes is powerful enough to keep people awake for a month. But before it can be rolled out to the soldiers, she needs to see if it works. That's where you come in. They need a test subject to watch and observe any possible successes or side effects. As a prisoner and enemy of the state, you're the perfect subject because, well, you mean nothing to them. And in exchange for your honorable service, freedom. Sounds like a good deal, right? The experiments take place in an undisclosed top-secret government facility. Although the scientists are obviously far more concerned with the gas they created, they do offer some minor comforts to help keep you occupied for the test period. The test facility is stocked with books, running water, a toilet, and a cot. However, the cot has no bedding because they don't want you to get too comfy and possibly fall asleep. There's also a two-way mirror for physical observation. Now that everything is set, it's time for the experiment to begin. After nearly 5 days, everything seems relatively normal. The gas is being pumped at a reasonable rate, and you know what? It's working, you're still awake, and no other negative side effects either. You utilize the time to catch up on some much-needed reading. In fact, you've also started writing a book about your life. Productive and peaceful, right? Just you and your thoughts and no sleep. Wrong. Now 9 days have passed by and some deep feeling inside you is causing you to scream hysterically and exert massive amounts of energy. And then strangely, as fast as it started, your screaming stops. The books that provided you so much interest earlier now start to feed your imagination. But now it feels different, much different. Instead of actually reading, you're tearing out the pages of the books and sticking them to the large two-way mirrors where you know you're being watched from. With the two-way mirror blocked, the scientists can no longer see what you're doing or what effect the gas is having. What's happening inside the test room is a complete mystery. Although the scientists vowed not to intervene for 30 days, it's now clear that they might have to open the doors and check on the patient. On day 15, it happened. The door is opened. Inside, without sleep for nearly 15 days, you're going almost insane. Delusions and hallucinations have become a very, very real thing. Your physical appearance has become zombie-like. No food and water has been touched, which means you're also very dehydrated and severe malnutrition is kicking in. The scientists' conclusion is becoming very simple. Not sleeping for extended periods of time is a very dangerous thing, and the addition of a gas stimulant, much like the incredibly strong doses of caffeine, does not help. So the experiment fails, and much like any legendary secret government conspiracy or test story, the site must be covered up and hidden from the public forever. No one can ever know what really happened. The Russian sleep experiment story that's floating around the internet ends much more gruesomely and certainly makes for an excellent campfire story. But the simple reality is much of what is described in the story is impossible, and the story itself is certainly false. To date, there is no gas that can keep you awake for long, extended periods of time. What is true is that a lack of sleep is very unhealthy, and it can lead to a wide range of physical and non-physical effects, and even death in extreme cases. So when you're telling those spooky stories around the campfire, always make sure you get plenty of solid sleep. Spiders are all around us. There are over 35,000 different species, and one study of homes in South Carolina found spiders present in 100% of them. Most spiders do not pose a threat to humans and are actually quite helpful in keeping populations of other bugs in check. However, there are some species whose bites and venom can be extremely dangerous. There's a common misconception that the daddy longlegs is the most venomous spider, but that their fangs can't pierce human skin. In truth, daddy longlegs do occasionally bite people. However, their venom will produce a mild irritation at worst. According to scientists, the most venomous spider on the planet today is actually the Brazilian wandering spider, which got its name because it roams the forest floor looking for prey. A single bite from one of these spiders and you will instantly feel pain. Immediate symptoms include inflammation of the skin with severe burning and redness, goosebumps, and sweating. Their venom is strong enough to quickly kill bugs, birds, small rodents, and even young children. But in adults, the venom generally takes longer to work. As it courses through the bloodstream, further symptoms like blurred vision, nausea, erratic heartbeats, chills, and uncontrollable shaking can occur. There have even been instances of a strange side effect in men where it can make your you-know-what painfully swell and cause permanent damage. While the symptoms are very unpleasant, actual deaths from Brazilian wandering spider bites are rare. Out of the more than 7,000 bites that have been reported, there are only 10 deaths that have been attributed to the Brazilian wandering spider. That said, medical treatment is still required so that an antivenom can be administered. And while Brazilian wandering spiders are only native to South America, there have been news stories of them traveling along with banana shipments to other countries. So the next time you're picking out fruit at the grocery store, you may want to be extra careful. Despite strong warnings from the U.S. State Department about the dangers of visiting North Korea, the East Asian country is still a popular destination for adventurous travelers seeking an unconventional experience. But there's a lot you should consider before booking your next trip there. Just getting to North Korea can be quite an ordeal. A flight from Los Angeles will take at least 15 hours with a layover in Beijing. Once there, though, visitors find that North Korea is a beautiful country covered with mountains and valleys. And the capital city of Pyongyang is an experience like no other, with its own unique culture, food, and architecture. But North Korea has a reputation as a closed-off and secretive nation for a reason. There are numerous rules governing what tourists are allowed to see and even stricter controls on what they can photograph. And if you do happen to break one of these tourist rules, knowingly or otherwise, you may find yourself in a lot more trouble than you anticipated. Visitors have reported being aggressively searched and interrogated, and some have even been detained or taken prisoner for no reason at all. The really unlucky ones who are formally charged with a crime are often forced to participate in a sham trial and then sentenced to hard labor at work camps where the conditions are miserable. Long days of manual labor, not enough food, and crowded sleeping arrangements are the norm, along with prison sentences that can last 15 years or more for even a minor violation. Prisoners are usually released only after serving their terms in full, or by special pardon from the leader of the country, Kim Jong-un. He gained control of North Korea in 2011 following the death of his father, Kim Jong-il, and has been in power ever since. Kim Jong-un maintains a strict dictatorship and lives a lavish lifestyle with access to Western goods and entertainment, but at the same time denies most North Korean citizens access to these comforts and luxuries. He has also accelerated North Korea's nuclear weapons program and missile development, conducting frequent tests of new missiles and warheads. Of even greater concern, recent North Korean missile tests have demonstrated that they likely have the range to target and hit the United States. U.S. citizen travel to North Korea may soon be banned and made illegal, so if you are considering a visit to North Korea, your time is running out. Just be really careful once you're there, or your trip could turn out to be much longer than you planned, with some very unexpected surprises. You've probably been wondering where Fuzzy and Nutz have been these last few months, and sadly, we have some bad news, because Fuzzy's been doing some hard time. Maximum security prisons are tough places to be, with many reports over the years showing that they are the most violent places to serve time in the world. With gangs, violence, and poor food and little privacy, it's no surprise that some inmates will do anything to escape serving out their full sentence. In 1962, what may be the most famous prison escape in history was carried out by Frank Morris and John and Clarence Anglin. Over its 29-year history as a federal penitentiary, 13 escape attempts had all ended in failure. Yet on June 11, 1962, Morris and the Anglin brothers were determined to be the first to successfully break out of Alcatraz and flee to safety. The team had spent 6 months sawing at the ventilation ducts in their cells with hidden saw blades, and then tried to cross the San Francisco Bay on a homemade raft made out of raincoats. The three were never found or heard from again, and it's believed that all 3 inmates drowned in the notoriously dangerous waters surrounding Alcatraz Island. In recent years, though, an even more high-profile prison escape took place on July 11, 2015, when infamous Mexican drug cartel chief El Chapo escaped from a Mexican penitentiary via a secret tunnel that his henchmen had been digging for months from a mile outside the prison. Infamous for escaping from prison, El Chapo has now been sentenced to the maximum security ADX facility in Colorado, a prison described as so secure that it would take bribing a warden and the entire prison staff to successfully break out. It's clear that though prisons are extremely secure places, they're certainly not escape-proof. But suppose you were dragged off to maximum security prison like poor Fuzzy, perhaps for a crime that you did not commit. How could you break out and make a run for freedom? First, you're going to need help. In the past, prison facilities were typically converted military facilities, like in the case of Alcatraz, or well-constructed but with many structural flaws. Often, they were allowed to fall into disrepair to the point that eventually a clever and very patient prisoner could grind or saw their way through the crumbling concrete of his cell. In the last few decades, though, there's been a radical shift in the way prisons are designed, with everything from engineers to psychological experts and even escape magicians being consulted on the design of each individual cell and the materials used. A modern cell is typically made of steel, which resists corrosion very well and is much harder to try to tunnel through than concrete, which can weaken with age. The cells are also constructed as individual units that fit into place within the structure of the actual building, meaning that there are no weak points to exploit, such as aging ventilation ducts or toilet pipes. Breaking out of a modern maximum security prison is definitely going to be difficult, but not impossible, as seen in the case of convicted killers David Sweat and Richard Matt, who broke out of their cell on June 6, 2015. But how did they do it? And how can you replicate the escape yourself? First, as we mentioned, you're going to need outside help. Modern prisons strictly regulate the movement and personal belongings of each prisoner, so trying to sneak power tools to your cell on your own isn't going to get you anywhere but thrown into isolation. You should try to bribe a guard or maintenance worker into leaving some tools behind or letting you sneak them back to your cell. In the case of Sweat and Matt, this is exactly what is suspected to have happened. With tools at your disposal, you can start cutting your way through the steel wall at the back of your cell, where it connects to the building's maintenance areas and pipework. Before you hop through, you're going to need to fool the other guards who conduct 2-hour head counts all throughout the night. So simply take a bunch of your clothes and arrange them under the covers of your bed, so it looks like you're still snuggled up tight. Next, you're going to want to head through your escape hole and down into the very basement level of the building. Your best bet will be to locate a heating pipe, which are typically easy to identify as they carry hot water that makes the pipe warm to the touch. Follow this pipe into the very bowels of the building until you see it start to head outwards. At that point, you're going to need your tools again to start chiseling through the concrete around the pipe so you can squeeze through. At last, you get to the foundation of the prison itself, and here is where you're going to have to get a little bit lucky. Major buildings like prisons that house hundreds of people typically have 2 major outlet pipes that connect to the outside world. One is a large steam pipe to vent excess heating, and the other is the main sewer line, full of, well, the sewage of hundreds of people. If you manage to find yourself at the steam vent, you could cut into it and crawl your way into freedom, perhaps with some minor scalding, but otherwise relatively unscathed. If, however, you happen to find yourself at the sewage pipe, we hate to break it to you, but there's only one way to freedom, and it's not going to smell or feel very nice. Once you've waded through tons of muck, though, congratulations! You've officially broken out of prison. You'd better enjoy your newfound freedom as quickly as you can, because while prison escapes are rare, getting away with it is even rarer. And most prison escapees are back in police custody within just a matter of weeks. How would you escape from prison? Why not leave poor Fuzzy some tips in the comment section below? The plague, also known as the pestilence, bubonic plague, and the Black Death, has plagued people for forever. Outbreaks of this deadly disease have been noted since the beginning of recorded history, and there are even still outbreaks today. Today's cases aren't as deadly thanks to modern medicine, but what would it have been like to get the plague in medieval times before we knew how to treat it? During the largest outbreak of the plague, it's estimated that 75 to 200 million people across Europe, Asia, and Africa may have died. And modern historians think that because record-keeping was so poor that the actual number might be even higher. Close living quarters and quarantining entire families together helped quickly spread this deadly and painful disease. The bubonic plague is a disease that comes from bacteria that live in the soil. While in the dirt, the bacteria isn't harmful to humans. Once it's picked up by rats, though, it morphs into a different and more deadly form. This would still not be so bad. Rats rarely bite humans after all, but fleas then bite the rats and pick up the bacteria. Fleas were very common in medieval households, which is bad news since when fleas bite humans, the bacteria gets injected directly into the bloodstream, and fleas were a big problem for your average medieval peasant in their day-to-day life. Once in the bloodstream, the bacteria quickly moves to the lymph glands, where the bacteria multiply and cause the glands to swell with infection. This creates one of the telltale signs of the plague: big black swellings at the sites of the lymph glands. These are called buboes and are extremely painful. The bubo is what gives the disease its iconic name, the bubonic plague. Once the bacteria have multiplied in the glands, they enter the bloodstream and go straight to the heart. From there, they can quickly spread to the rest of the body. This causes everything from delirium to fever to raging thirst. The lymph glands continue to swell up until eventually they burst, both inside and outside the body. It is not a pretty sight. Also not a pretty sight, plague doctors who wore long waxed leather coats and large beaked masks filled with herbs to try and ward off the disease. Plague doctors had little to no scientific backing for their cures. They tried crazy ideas like applying piping hot stuffed onions to try to burn off the buboes. As you can probably guess, it didn't help and often made things worse. Inside the body, the burst debris from the gland enters the bloodstream, leading to clots that gather in the fingers and toes, cutting off the circulation and causing them to go black. The debris continues to clot in the bloodstream, eventually causing major organ failure and then death. The plague also causes pneumonia, which means a plague victim will be coughing up a storm that's full of plague bacteria. It enters the air and right into the lungs of another victim. It's estimated that the medieval plague killed between 30 to 50% of Europe's population, and while the mortality rate was potentially as high as 75%, that does mean that some people survived the disease. And modern science has shown that those people went on to live longer, healthier lives after the plague. If you do get bit by a flea that bit a rat that was rolling around in the dirt, don't worry too much. Modern medicine knows exactly how to treat the disease, so the odds of you ending up like a medieval peasant are slim. Volcanoes are an amazing, beautiful, and powerful representation of just how alive our planet is. These amazing creations of nature offer an amazing view into how Mother Nature functions and literally lets off a little steam. Many volcanoes, including active ones, are a popular destination for tourists as well as scientific inquiry. There are even some active volcanoes you can walk the rim of, at your own risk, of course. But what would happen if you fell right into bubbling lava? Would you sink like a stone to the bottom of the ocean, or would you float like someone relaxing in a pool? Let's start with the basics. There are around 1,500 known volcanoes on Earth. Of these, roughly 600 have been active in recent history, and between 50 and 70 are actively erupting each year. Many volcanoes have parks, hiking trails, and tourist centers surrounding them to provide education about this natural wonder. If you do visit, you must always be cautious as they're constantly changing and sometimes even release toxic gases into the area. Permitting that the conditions are safe and you can hike to the top, you can peer inside and see that strangely beautiful lava. Or is it magma? Or are those two words the same? The answer is sort of. Okay, let's get some vocabulary set before we further explore. Magma and lava are both molten or liquefied rock. Magma is molten rock inside the Earth, whereas lava forms when magma reaches the surface of the planet through volcanic vents or eruptions. So to recap, magma is inside the Earth deep under the surface. Lava is on the Earth's surface. That means if you fell into a volcano, it would be magma that you're falling into, since it's still technically inside the Earth. But what are you actually falling into? Magma consists of a very hot slush of crystals, volcanic gases, and bubbles filled with volcanic gases. You might think that when you hit the magma you would sink into it, cause a splash, and even be able to swim through it. The reality is quite a bit different. Lava and magma are significantly more dense than water, meaning that if you could withstand the high heat, you wouldn't sink, you would float. But magma isn't like a pool, hot tub, or ocean. You're not going to be able to swim or float on it. Because of its extreme temperatures, generally ranging somewhere between 1,200 and 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit, you would burst into flames once you made contact with the magma. In fact, you would probably catch fire before even making contact due to the high levels of radiant heat, while the super hot gases would cause you to burn to a crisp inside your body. And remember what we said about the density? It's so much higher than water, it would be like falling onto a concrete floor. Now, you don't just have to worry about the extreme temperatures, but also the risk of breaking every bone in your body when you do hit the surface. Volcanoes are a powerful and unpredictable part of nature. They're beautiful and offer an incredible amount of insight into how Mother Nature works. Scientists have been studying volcanoes for hundreds of years, and while it's sometimes possible to predict an eruption, we can only do it with some certainty if there's a specific and thorough understanding of the activity of that particular volcano. Meaning that many times we can tell an eruption might occur, but there are still plenty of times when we have no idea. Terrifying! Volcanoes are incredible places to explore and learn about, but if you do decide to check one out yourself, please do it safely. Do your research before you go, learn about the daily changing environments at that location, and follow all park safety guidelines. And while lava flowing out of a volcano might look beautiful, be sure to keep your distance. Falling in is the last thing you want to experience yourself. Humans eat a lot of strange and gross things. Snails, fish eggs, cheeses that smell like old socks, even bugs and spiders. But is it safe to eat these creepy crawlies? What about the venomous ones like black widows? People from around the world eat insects and arachnids all the time. In fact, it's estimated that over 2 billion people across the globe make bugs a part of their diet, and many are even considered a delicacy. Grasshoppers, crickets, ants, and cockroaches are fried, sautéed, preserved like jelly, or just eaten raw. A type of tarantula is eaten in Cambodia, and you can even buy them from vendors on the street, just like you could get a hot dog on the sidewalk in the United States. This might sound strange to you, but it's very common in other places, and they might think your hot dog full of mystery meat is more disgusting than popping a whole spider in your mouth. None of those bugs are venomous, so they're all safe to eat. But what would happen if you tried to eat a dangerous spider, like the brown recluse or a black widow? Just the thought of their long, spindly legs and hairy, fat, slime-filled abdomens makes us want to gag. But is it also dangerous to eat them? What would the venom do to your body if you could choke one down? Would it make you sick? Could it even kill you? The most dangerous spider in the world isn't the black widow or the brown recluse, but the Brazilian wandering spider, which has the world's deadliest spider venom. Just one little bite from one of these can leave you in serious trouble. Their venom is strong enough to quickly kill small animals and will eventually kill an adult human too. If you tried to pop one of these bad boys in your mouth, you'd be likely immediately bitten in the tongue or throat, and it would be just as bad as being bitten anywhere else on the body. You'd feel immediate searing pain, begin sweating, and the area you were bitten would start to swell, which could cause your throat to close up and prevent you from breathing. But what if you were able to tough it out and quickly swallow the spider before it had the chance to bite you? Well, we've got bad news for you, because you just made your problem even worse. Now you've got a deadly venomous spider heading down your digestive tract where it can bite you over and over again. But wait, wouldn't the spider suffocate or drown? No, thanks to their slow metabolism, some spiders can live without air for hours or even days. That means you can have a live spider biting you all the way down to your stomach. Yikes! No thank you. Okay, so eating them alive is definitely out of the question, but what happens if you eat one of those super deadly venomous spiders but cook it first? Maybe by giving it a little flash fry and creating a French fried spider fritter. You won't be winning any cooking awards, but would it still kill you the way eating an alive one would? Spider venom is made of certain proteins, and once the spidery snack got through your digestive system without any bites from the now incapacitated spider and it hit your stomach, the acid there would break the bonds in the venom proteins apart and render it harmless. Brazilian wandering spiders, black widows, brown recluses, all of them are safe to eat once the spider is cooked and dead. So, while we still wouldn't recommend it, as long as you cook a venomous spider first, then you won't die. And who knows, with people becoming more and more adventurous with what they eat and new food sources being considered all the time, you might just be biting into a Brazilian wandering spider sandwich in the future. The fate of the Titanic is one of the most well-known maritime disasters in modern history. The supposedly unsinkable ship sank after colliding with an iceberg in the North Atlantic during its maiden voyage in 1912. And far more tragic was the loss of life that could have been prevented. Ever wonder whether you would have survived on board the Titanic? The RMS Titanic was a British passenger liner constructed in the early 1900s, measuring 883 feet long or approximately 269 meters, with a total of 10 decks. It was, at the time, the world's largest ship and undoubtedly the most luxurious. There was a number of factors determining passenger experience. However, the primary one, as you would expect, was based on the class of the ticket you purchased. The opulence and grandeur of the rooms, dining areas, and amenities available to first-class passengers were far beyond anything that third-class passengers could ever imagine. And let's not forget the unseen men who worked in the engine room to keep the ship moving. The Titanic's furnaces required over 600 tons of coal a day, shoveled by hand around the clock, by workers deep within the bowels of the ship. These men were known as the Black Gang because of the soot and coal dust they were covered in. The moonless conditions on the night of the tragedy meant the ship's lookouts were unable to see the approaching iceberg until it was too late to avoid collision. While it's almost impossible to believe, the Titanic carried only 20 lifeboats, which was nowhere near capable of accommodating over 2,200 passengers and crew that were aboard the ship. The women and children first rule applied when loading the lifeboats, beginning with the first class, of course. And as a result, the difference in survival rates across classes is staggering. In total, more than 1,500 people on board were killed. Upon being violently thrown from the deck and plunging into the freezing North Atlantic water, one survivor described the lethally cold temperature as being stabbed with 1,000 knives all over your body. The list of first-class passengers included some of the wealthiest and most well-known people in the world. So it's no surprise that the ship was carrying an estimated $6 million of cash, jewels, and other valuables on board. And while some passengers tried to save what they could, sadly, most of the treasure sunk, along with the Titanic, to the bottom of the ocean. Nothing fascinates people quite like a bit of mercury. As the only metal that's liquid at room temperature, mercury doesn't quite behave like most liquids we're used to. That's because most liquids, well, they aren't metals. Mercury's viscosity is 1.5 times that of water, and its surface tension is 6 times greater. That's why it beads up into little balls so easily instead of smear when you spread it around. But mercury isn't something to play around with. In fact, it's one of the most toxic substances on Earth. And even just touching it can cause severe health hazards. Contact with skin can cause severe irritation and even chemical burns. And within minutes, you could experience dizziness, vertigo, flu-like symptoms, burning and irritation, pale or clammy skin, irritability, and emotional instability. That's because mercury is a nerve toxin, and it directly affects the brain. Severe exposure can lead to madness and even death. But because mercury has a very high vapor pressure, it can vaporize at room temperature. So even if you can't taste or smell it, you could still be breathing in dangerous amounts of vaporized mercury. Surprisingly though, despite being one of the most dangerous poisons on Earth, up until the late 19th century, doctors would prescribe mercury as a laxative. That's because while its vapors are highly toxic and it's easily absorbed by the porous skin, mercury is not very easily absorbed by the specialized tissues of the gastrointestinal tract. That's not to say it's safe to drink mercury, far from it. But doing it once or twice shouldn't be enough to seriously harm you, and word has it that it's a very effective laxative. But we're okay with not finding out for ourselves. So what would happen exactly if you dove into a pool full of mercury? Well, the first answer is that you would almost certainly receive a very fatal dose of mercury poisoning as the metal made contact with all of your bare skin. You'd probably inhale a great deal of vaporized mercury, which would instantly go to work on your brain as we saw earlier. At such high concentrations, death would be certain. But remember how we also said earlier that liquid mercury wasn't like most other liquids? That's because it's far more dense, viscous, and has a much greater surface tension than water. Mercury's density is so great, in fact, that you could probably stand in a pool of it and only sink to about your shins. So trying to dive into a pool of it? Well, you wouldn't sink very much at all. Mercury is a pretty dangerous neurotoxin that can be easily absorbed through the skin or accidentally inhaled. Severe exposure can cause madness, blindness, chemical burns, and even outright death. But for all its dangers, at least now you know there's little chance of ever drowning in it. Have you ever wanted to be in charge? maybe a teacher at your school or the boss at your job. Or maybe you've dreamed about ruling an entire country, and not as an elected leader, but as the all-powerful king. Today, we're going to take a look at what it would be like if you were king. To start, we're not going to talk about modern royalty, who are mostly figureheads and often legally have little to no actual power over the people. Instead, we're going back in time to around 1500 to a kingdom like England. You've just inherited the crown from your late father and take on a name worthy of a monarch. You ascend to the throne as King Fuzzy VIII. Okay, so you're the king now. So what? What kind of power do you actually have? Well, let's assume that you are a popular ruler and both the common people as well as your nobles love you. They see your rule as being a divine right. God himself wants you to be king, and hey, who are they to go against the big guy in the sky? They pass a law saying that even though there's a separate government in place, you have the ultimate say-so over things and can overrule any law they pass. You can even pass your own laws without parliament simply by proclamation. Basically, if you say it's the law, then it's the law. If you want to make a rule that everyone has to walk around with ducks on their heads, then hey, they have to do it. But like we said, you're a popular king and you want to stay that way, so you wouldn't do something like that. All that power must mean that you're pretty rich too, right? Well, you recently had everything you owned counted up, and when you have that much stuff, you need a whole team to help you figure out just how much you own. They took stock of all your jewelry, your artwork, your palace, your extra palaces, and then they came up with a value of 300,000 British pounds. They then counted up all of your military equipment like weapons, horses, suits of armor, and got to another 300,000. Now combined, that 600,000 pounds might not sound like much for a king, but that would almost be $250 million today. Not bad for one bear. So what do you do with all that money? You have fun. The king should be happy, so there were always plenty of parties. The king especially likes huge feasts with tons of food and dancing. There's also plenty of time for sports like tennis or horseback riding, as well as other hobbies like playing and listening to music. When you're the king, it just so happens that everyone wants to do the same things that you want to do. It can't be all fun all the time though. Being the divine ruler means doing exactly that, ruling. Have you ever heard the phrase, heavy is the head that wears the crown? Well, if you had, then you know that as a king, you'll sometimes have to make some pretty tough decisions. As head of the state, you have to preside over parliament, as well as make decisions about the economy, the military, and foreign policy. Maybe there's a war going on, and you don't have enough supplies. That means you need to raise taxes to buy more. But then the nobles will be upset, and you need them to like you because they control the sources of the supplies you need. It can get so complicated that it would make your head spin. Luckily, you are a smart and fair ruler, and you're always able to come up with the solution to these problems in the end. So, now that you've had your long and successful rule, how might it all end? Well, if everything went smoothly and you weren't overthrown in a revolution or beaten in a war, hopefully now you have an heir that everyone can get behind as the next ruler. Now, if you didn't produce an heir with a clear claim to the throne, well, then there will likely be some rocky times, as lots of people will see this as their chance to become king. But at least you won't be around to worry about it. So what do you think? Would you want to be the king? Would all of the work be worth the power and fun? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Fuzzy and Nutty for more fun.